A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our audience who are joining us today from different parts of the world. Well, thank you for joining. It's a great privilege for us to have an internationally renowned pricing thought leader with us today, Mr. Navdeep Sodhi. Navdeep is managing director of Sodhi Pricing, and he's co-author of the internationally best-selling book Six Sigma Pricing, improving pricing operations to improve profits. He is also authored several highly acclaimed articles in Harvard Business Review, Oxford Press, Emerald Books, Prentice Halls, and Quality Digest. Navdeep is a teaching fellow at the University of Minnesota's Executive Program, instructor at the University of St. Thomas, and recently a visiting professor at China European International Business School in Shanghai. He is a recipient of Professional Pricing Society's Award of Excellence. Navdeep has an MBA from George Washington University, and it's a great honor for us to have Navdeep share his views on a very important topic with us. Thank you, Navdeep.
Good morning, Anshu. Thank you for that kind introduction. Just one little correction. Actually, I went to Georgetown. My friends from Georgetown who are listening to this might kill me if I let it go. So yes, I went to Georgetown.
And that was a small blip from me. Just one bit of advice for the audience. For the audience, you can follow live comments on Twitter using hashtag Sciative Knowledge and hashtag Ask Navdeeps. Towards the end of the session, as time permits, we will take questions posted by the audience. Please make sure to include hashtag Sciative Knowledge and hashtag Ask Navdeep in your comments. Now, today Navdeep will be talking about Six Sigma pricing and applying it to improve pricing operations and profitability. Now, as we all know, Six Sigma is all about making your processes perfect, and pricing is by far one of the most important process an organization has. We would love to hear your views on this very important topic, Navdeep. Without further ado, it's over to you.
Thanks again, Anshu, and for that kind introduction. Greetings to all of you, and it is really a pleasure to participate in this webinar series created by Sciative. The topic of discussion, as Anshu already mentioned, is Six Sigma pricing, improving pricing operations to increase profits. It's based on the book that I co-authored with Professor Mohan Sodhi. As Anshu was mentioning, the topic may sound a bit unusual. Why talk about Six Sigma in the context of pricing? And why are we talking about operations and not about strategy? In the discussion today, I'll clarify the respective roles of pricing strategy and pricing operations, how they're different and how they're related. And then set up the concept for how to use Six Sigma for pricing. And then we'll go into a case study about a real company that use Six Sigma processes, Six Sigma tools to get started on their turnaround. And then as we conclude that discussion, we'll talk about takeaways, and then we'll open the forum for questions, as Anshu has already mentioned. So without further ado, pricing strategy, as you know, is market facing. It's external facing, and for any strategy to fruition, it needs to be in place for a substantial period of time. And strategy, marketing strategy or pricing strategy typically relates to the customer behavior, competitive behavior, and how the collaborators, if they are regulators, partners in the marketplace, relates to them, and also the context, that why are we thinking about pricing strategy? So for instance, if a company is establishing its list prices based on their price value positioning in the marketplace, pricing operations is slightly different. It's internally focused, it's introspective, it's what's happening inside the company, and it's typically deals with things that are short to medium term, things that, for example, customer service is handling customer calls every hour, every minute. And there are processes within the company about discount approvals that can go daily. And there are similar processes that go over months, but they're typically short to medium term. And pricing operations relates to the fifth C of pricing, which is the company itself. What is happening inside the company in terms of systems and processes that are related to price execution. So think about it. There are a lot of companies with very smart people and smart pricing strategy, but they're all not very successful. So to make pricing a success, pricing execution has to be working. So for example, if a company sets up discount policy and processes for the sales team, that needs to be working very tightly for them to have satisfied customers and just to be able to price correctly in the marketplace. One more aspect about the differentiation between pricing strategy and operations is the level of the company where these two originate. So we all like to believe that we are strategists, but think about it. Long-term plans and pricing strategy typically originates at the highest levels of the company, at the most senior most levels. And then the senior managers pass it on to the middle managers and the work teams to execute. So for that entire process to work, the roles and the goals of respective players have to work very well. And there has to be a feedback, a closed loop between strategy and operations for both to be effective. So if you think about pricing strategy as the head of the company, if you look at the company as an organism, pricing strategy is the head of that organization, and pricing operations is the heart and hands. So we need the head, heart, and hands to be able to work together for an effective pricing process. So what should be the role of pricing operations? One is to make sure that there is compliance to strategy. And the second one is to be able to fine-tune pricing strategy, that if there is a changing situation in the marketplace. So let me talk about the first function of pricing operations. So here's a company that has, let's say, established new list prices or they're levying surcharges in the marketplace now. So they need to make sure that the contract terms and the discount guidelines are in place and the systems are working to be able to price correctly in the marketplace. And then they need to have measurement and reporting to make sure everything is working perfectly. Whereas comes to the second function, what if there is a sudden stimuli from the marketplace, that the energy prices have gone up, or one of the competitors is being disruptive, or there is raw material cost fluctuation. So the companies then need to, again, modify, let's say, their contracts. They need to figure out, should we have discounts or rebates, and update the pricing guidelines. So now for all of this to work, function number one and function number two both need to be working for that company. So if they're not working very well, so if the pricing operations are not very tight, the net prices now start to decline. So we see lower profits, in many cases, angry customers. And then as you see in this little chart, and this is from a real company, by the way, that over time, in 3-4 years, the pricing kept declining and the profits kept leaking. So I'm going to take some B2B examples from companies and industries that I work closely with, but the same examples I'm seeing work in the B2C world. So here's the first example is of a air conditioning manufacturer. This was a $6 billion company. They had a large variation in discounts. So before this call started, Anshu and I were talking about the need for micro-segmentation and almost nano-segmentation now that we live in the digital world. But think about this environment where both the customers and manufacturers probably are not that sophisticated yet. But the variation is because people are really not following guidelines. So in this company, the guidelines were in place, but they were so old that they didn't mean anything, and everything had to go through the exception process. And the internal roles, and there were quite a few players involved, the salespeople, account managers, marketing people, pricing people, finance people, everybody had a finger in the pot of pricing, and everybody was involved in approvals. So the roles were quite unclear. And as such, the company was emphatically focused on sales growth. The prices kept falling. So initially, we estimated that the company was leaking 2 to 4% of profits annually. And here's an example of a medical device company, also a very large company, very innovative environment, and they had, by the nature of the business, very high profit margins. And they had large contracts with hospital systems, group purchasing organizations, HMOs, contracts that could go up to $30 to even $40 million a year. But the contract compliance was very poor. And this company was leaving $25 to $30 million a year on the table. A third company, a global manufacturer of tools. In this company, they had multiple channels, and they worked with very large customers like automotive companies to very small customers. But the contract terms were so varied that the systems actually didn't even support them. And so the compliance was quite poor. And often there needed to be a manual intervention at the last step when the pricing was going to be delivered to the customers. So often the pricing was wrong. And often there was a sales pushback even at the last minute when a system delivered the price. And this company, if they ran a promotion, that promotion almost ran for eternity. Nobody removed them from the system. So they got the codes that you were used for promotions were misused quite often. And the result was not just that there were price leaks, there was a lot of customer dissatisfaction because of all this. And now think about your own company. And if you're seeing trends like, oh, when you have good ideas, people are saying, oh, I really don't have time for you. Or it's a great idea, but let's not use it in my backyard. And if you see something like this, here's actually the discount. This is sort of a histogram of discounts of a real company where the discounts went from almost 5% to 70, 80%. So in this case, when you see some customers were getting very high prices and a lot of customers were getting prices more than, much less than what was intended. So think about it, if this is happening, whether you're in the B2B world or B2C world, we are going to address that and keep your pain points on the top of mind as you're going through the rest of the discussion. So now let's switch gears a little bit. Let me talk about Six Sigma a little bit, and then we'll set up the context. Why bring in Six Sigma? So in manufacturing, quality and variance is controlled by Six Sigma. So typically, if there is variance to a given specification, we call it bad quality. So let's think about a company that's manufacturing pipes, and the pipes need to be 10 millimeter in diameter. So if we look at the acceptable limits that are given to us, 0.1 millimeter variance is much better than 0.5 millimeters. So our goal is that we want to bring all our product that is being manufactured or serviced to that level of acceptable limit. And so our motivation is to squeeze everything we produce in that 6 standard deviations around the mean, so everything falls within the acceptable limits. Now, in the scenario of a company, and when it comes to quality, we see there is absolute support from all across the board. So the key stakeholders in the manufacturing or even supply chain are the engineers and the manufacturer and the factory people. And the senior managers who are involved in quality, they immediately say, yes, let's improve quality. But when it comes to pricing, there's a little more complexity. So pricing is not simply saying that, oh, there is a variance to spec relationship, that yes, we have a clear specification like in manufacturing that we need to figure out. what happens in pricing is, as I mentioned in one of my examples, the multiple functions with varying incentive structures. So salespeople, pricing people, they are even incented in different ways, product managers, account managers. So think about that. Everybody has a different goal, and they're not necessarily shared goals. And in pricing, we see there are ad hoc processes, ad hoc requirements always creep in if the company is not managing it very tightly. And you also see a tendency, even in very smart companies, to sidestep company interests to be just responsive to the customer. So there is the speed that we need to go tell the customer what they've asked for. So it's not always about our interests. We need to respond to the customer very fast. And then what's happening is outside the company, there's always change and there's uncertainty. So which makes pricing more complex. So pricing operations as such are even more complicated than manufacturing. So we need to almost adapt Six Sigma to pricing operations. So hence the name pricing operations. And actually this name was coined by the chief editor of Harvard Business Review when we wrote the first article. And when we pitched the idea to them, they thought it was a great idea. So they were the ones that said, why do you want to say Six Sigma for pricing operations? Just call it Six Sigma pricing. So let me get into the case study. And this is again a real environment. The situation was the company had a significantly high raw material escalation, which was not planned for. So the CEO was quite worried. Actually, the situation was there was an earnings call, and the CEO announced to the Wall Street that the company did not know how to handle it. And the following day, the share price on a base of $42 went down $3 just with that one sentence. And the reason the CEO was worried was in the past when the company had taken list prices, they really never stuck because whenever there was a price increase, the discounting went up. And in this case, in this company's case, the discounting was already out of control. And the people who could actually manage to it best, their relationship was, which is sales and pricing, that relationship was quite contentious, and everything was going back and forth. The guidelines were outdated, roles were unclear. So a lot of these things were happening. So people were worried. So the one objective was, how do we ensure that if there was a price increase and the list price increase, how do we make sure that there was a proportional increase in net prices and after all the discounts? So with this, let me go back to the players. When we look at the roles and goals, how do they work? So by design, when we look at the sales team, their motivation in most companies, the motivation is to increase sales and market share. And the way they do it is by managing customer relationships. And to be able to manage their relationships well, they need fast approvals so they can close deals. So that's simply saying that's what our salespeople do. And for pricing, typically the roles are unclear, but let's say their motivation is to control the transaction prices so they don't keep falling, and we try to keep somewhat sustain higher prices, at least they try to. And the main task is to be able to look at history when analyzing quotes and to make sure that the prices offered to customers are not too low and also not too high. And what they need, since they are sitting in the office, they need market information from the salespeople. What is the competitive scenario? What is the customer behavior? And they need that kind of a qualitative background on the customers, but also quantitative information, what they're hearing about, who's the competition, what attributes, what product is being offered by other players in the marketplace. So by design, if you look, companies have set up sales and pricing in their respective roles By themselves, these roles are not ill-defined, but often when they don't have shared goals, there's a lot of contention and the objectives are divergent. Sales goes after just increasing revenue, whereas pricing is going after managing profit. So that way, these two parties don't see eye to eye. And if we do a high-level process map for this company, let's look at the three players: the customer, sales, and pricing. And if you look at stepwise, there is simply high-level six-step process. The first step is where the salesperson meets the customer for an initial price assessment, where they say, this is the product we are going to offer, and this is the price, and these are the terms. And if the customer asks for a price exception, and if it's not within the salesperson's authority, they pass along a request for a price reduction or change in terms to pricing. And then pricing takes the form, that information, and they do a quotation. And after the review and analysis, they communicate that approval to the salesperson, who then passes it on to the customer. Now you would say, this is a very simple process. What can go wrong with it? And in a minute or so, I'll show you, even in this high-level process that we are seeing, how things can go drastically wrong if they're not managed correctly. Switching gears again a little bit, let's talk about Six Sigma, and then we'll talk about its application in this company. Six Sigma, typically Six Sigma is managed in 5 steps in their toolkit, which is DMAIC. The first step is define, and this step is about defining the defect. So in this company's case, it would be, let's say, excessive and unexplained variance in pricing. Define also defines the team that's involved. And in that, the team would be a multifunctional team, so people can have shared goals, not just pricing going in a corner and doing something and asking people to comply. And also in this step itself is an estimate for entitlement. That is, if the company is going to go through an effort of price improvement, what would they get out of it? The second step is measure. In that, it looks at data, also looks at the different processes, systems that are involved. What are the inputs in those systems and processes, and what are the outputs? And then the third step is analyze. And this is going after finding the root causes of the problem. So in the fourth step, it is about improving and coming up with recommendations. Now, all this is very easy, right? Makes complete sense. This is what you would do even if you didn't have a Six Sigma step. The fifth step becomes quite important, and that is, now we also want to ensure that if we have made some changes, that they become, the improvement becomes permanent. And if there are any known risks, we also preempt those risks in this step. So looking at now, going back to the company itself, what happened in terms of how they defined their product. So in this case, the defect was the invoice prices do not follow guidelines. Partly the guidelines are out of control, partly people are not complying very well, even to those outdated guidelines. The scope in their case, they kept it narrow to only one product line, which was worth $250 million. And the charter was to look at the as-is price process to see where things went wrong and how it could be improved. Now, the more important thing is to look at customer. A lot of the pricing strategy work we do is about the external customer, the end customer who actually pays the bills. In this case, the customer was the senior management who were looking for the price gain, the CEO. He or she is the customer in this context. And the team, one is setting up a steering committee, people who are involved in support and oversight and project sponsorship. Now, this is a common problem that I hear many, even very senior pricing people, I hear them complaining, I don't have my CEO's support. So in this case, what happened, actually, I've been in companies where I went to the senior guy who could help me and said, look here, I'm going to do this work. If you have 1 to 2 hours a month where I can show you my progress along with a cross-functional team, would you be available? In 10 out of 10 cases, I have received the answer yes. So the question about I don't have senior management support, this is something you need to do and get it figured out. And then the project team needs to be a cross-functional team, not just pricing and analytics people going and actually, although they would do very good work, the cross-functional team also has a role to make sure the emotions subside and people work on shared goals. And pricing could be the process, still be the project leader in this case. The entitlement, usually when you start any project, unless it's very clear manufacturing, you may not know how to set the expectations. So in this case, the senior management only allowed $500,000. So if you think $500,000 on a base of 250 million was only 0.2%, which seemed very low. But in this company, they were so interested in sales growth and not losing any market share, they deliberately set up a small goal because they didn't want to take a huge risk. So this being the define, then we get into measure. In measure, first is to actually go back and look at the process that's there and honestly look at the process and say, how are things not working very well? And so if you see between the sales and customer, what if the salesperson just, the customer asked for a lower price and the salesperson said, yes, I'll just give you a lower price. And they circumvented this entire process of 6 steps. The process completely fails. Or what if the salesperson asks for a higher discount and the pricing people keep asking for information, the salesperson doesn't have information or doesn't want to give it. So they keep going back and forth until some senior guy steps in and scolds the pricing team. And regardless of all the time spent, the lower price is approved, whether it was justified or not. And this is a hassle in pricing teams also, although they want the information, but they don't know what to do with it. The tools just are not set. So they keep mulling over and keep doing analysis without a very clear purpose. And that also becomes a problem. And then the end product is either the customer gets too high a price or too lower price, and that becomes a problem. So at a high level, you see just a few problems, but in reality, you could see many other problems as well. And the other thing in part of the measure is to go actually look at the data. First is to look at the quality of data, what kind of reports are already available. So in this company, when I was involved, there were about 200 pricing reports that had been developed over the years, and all of them were in play. Different people got different reports, and sometimes when you compare 2 reports about the same fields, they didn't jive. So there was a lot of mistakes in the reports, and eventually what we did was, out of this 200 plus reports, when it was presented to senior management, we said, these reports don't make sense. So the president of the division said, I don't know about these reports, and if nobody's looking at them, shut them all down except 3 or 4. So that's what we did, and nobody asked for those reports again. And the 4 reports that we had most confidence in stayed. And then looking at the transactional data, so went back 2-3 years worth of transactional data to look at trends and different things. So one view that you see here is looking at different customer sizes and the relationship of price. So when you look at this data, you see the highest customer size, which was customers that went from $200,000 to $500,000 a year, versus very small customers who were as small as $2,000 to $5,000 a year. then if you see the trend line here, you see that biggest customers on average got the lowest price. And so that sort of makes sense, right? I mean, small customers do get higher price typically, and bigger customers get lower price. But where we are worried about is the spread. What happens, and is the spread in something in control? So that's what we wonder. And if we see the customers who pay the higher prices for the largest transactions, what if they find out that smaller customers are paying much lower prices? They'll ask to revisit their contracts, they ask for lower prices, or worst case scenarios, they could just leave our company and work with the competitors. Or what if we are offering very low prices to very small customers? We are just simply leaving money on the table. So the goal here then becomes is we look at these bottom tails for price, and we want to manage our price floors. So with the analysis, what the company could do was to really go deeper and understand the causes of variation in the process. So they could study the cause and effect, but in the context of how it affects the customer, which is the senior manager. So if there were situations like there's inadequate time for analysis by pricing, so then they need to figure out how do we maybe automate the process? Or what happens, how do we make sure that sales just doesn't offer a final price without even going through the approval process? Or how do we make sure that we gather information consistently for the transaction and that we also store it for future purposes? And then the second part would be to look at the overall size and the source of variance. So we can then do almost a Pareto. Which are the problems that we could fix first based on their impact or how easy they are? And that could be done not just for the size of the customer, it could be which customer segment. Is there any question of seasonality, different geographies? So think about it. If you're just looking at the spread, we are looking at in all these different contexts and come up with a game plan. What are the things that we do first? So in this company, what they did was they said, let's go fix our discounting process. And what they did was they did simple analysis, looked at the history, and they said, now we need to start managing the price floors. So they said, let's clearly have a floor for salespeople. So instead of for them to come for approvals, and that because every transaction was exception request, why don't we make it so that 50, 60, 70% of the time, they have enough authority to be able to approve the transaction. The rest of the time, now pricing analysts have more time on their hands. They also have a firm floor. And then if there is something they cannot approve because the discount being asked is much higher, it goes to the pricing manager who also has a firm floor. And the reason for these firm floors is it takes care of the emotion in the process. People know what to do. So rather than somebody being tasked to approve a very low price and they don't know what to do. So very clear guidelines by product, which season, what kind of distributor, everybody, there was clear guidelines set up because there was enough data. And then there was also an approval level for leadership. Although there was no firm floor, the leadership could approve any amount of discount for strategic reasons. But in all these cases, the approvals were tracked. And this was simple work to do. Now companies have such sophisticated tools, but even in Excel, the company could record who was the approver, who was it approved for, which sales office, and how much discount. So simple smart codes that could do that. And at the end of each month, the company could go back and look at who approved and how much. And it was not a case where a salesperson was told, okay, we want to approve your discount. Instead, they said, let's allow the discounting, but let's track the exceptions. So let's see what happens. Now, for control, we need to review the price performance. So in this case, if you look at each dot is 1 week of pricing, and this dot by itself is average prices. So if you see how these dots are falling, we created this lower limit and upper limit. And over the weeks, now this pricing is still fluctuating. This is the beginning of the project. And as the project progresses, first, the upper limit and lower limit, there's the variance is much less. And then as over time, you see the variance is really getting in control in 3-4 months. And then the company felt they were ready to take a price increase now. So when they took the price increase, the discounting went up again, but again, it's now coming back in control. And so that was what is happening here in this company. And then also to review the exceptions and the nature of price approvals. So in this case, I showed you in a previous slide that there were different levels set for different levels of the pricing team. In this case, there were 4 levels. So instead of calling salesperson level, in this company's case, it was where the salesperson made an error. And then there was refusal price, which is actually the analyst level, then the pricing manager, and then the leadership. Now, if you look closely, this is over 4 months when the project starts and how things are progressing. In the beginning, in the month of July, this is the white, only about 12% of the times there's an exception tracking. So people are not even coming for to get an approval. But as it comes in August, the exceptions actually increase. People are now coming, salespeople are coming to pricing people to get approvals. When it comes to September, which is the blue bars, now we see the process is coming in control. That the average discounts are increasing because most of the discounts are approved at a pricing person level itself. And then the pricing manager is touching fewer jobs. In the month of October, when there is a price increase, again, there's an increase, but there's an increase in both cases, pricing manager and refusal. And when you look at for the same months, over time, we see salespeople keep making more problems, but when it comes to October, they really got it. There's a price increase, but there are fewer errors. So just doing this, let's see what happened in the company. They made $5.8 million in just 6 months. And this is, again, a $250 million division. And over the year, they made $10 million. So that's almost 4% increase when they started from, the goal set was 0.2%. And there was very quick return. This was just the internal team working, and they could do the work in about a quarter. And it was very low investment. It's just minimal systems investment. This is the internal people working, doing the jobs they should be doing. And what it did was it really gave the senior management a lot of confidence. So the CEO could go back when the next quarter's earnings call happened. He said that the company had figured out how to get price, and the share price went up. And what it did also for the pricing team gave them much more influence because they were trusted, not by just the senior management, but by other functions in the company. And one of the unintended benefits was it didn't just help pricing, it helped the salespeople too, because salespeople over time had been complaining about certain things. When all that analysis was done, it validated some of the practices they had. So it came across as a fairly unbiased process. And what it did was then it replaced that emotion between sales and pricing with more data-based reasoning. So that gut feel that used to happen before was put on the side. Now, some takeaways. if you had to do it for your company, that improving pricing operations doesn't seem easy, and it does take a lot of effort, but the results can be outstanding. And I would recommend that always try to start small. If the company is not in any dire straits, start your work immediately, start small, and start to consolidate gains before going into bigger projects. And I see this very often, that senior pricing people especially want to make a big impact, and they start with big strategic projects. And often those projects don't work very well, and it doesn't help them as well. There are not many companies that have Six Sigma pricing in their company. So if your company has some Six Sigma experience, use Six Sigma tools. Otherwise, just use the tools that are available for Six Sigma pricing. And then when you have had some success, don't just stop there. Make sure that the gains that you achieved, they become institutionalized. So for example, as I show in the case study, that if there was a review process, continue with that review process, and within that review process, try to develop a roadmap which has a prioritized list of milestones, and these milestones are again related to shared objectives with, let's say, pricing and sales. So with that, I'll just wrap up that we did talk about pricing strategy and operations, the respective roles, why Six Sigma pricing, and talk about the case studies and takeaways. And then if you had further, if you wanted to read it up, there are these resources, and if you read Chinese, there's a Chinese version also of the book. So with that, I'll open the forum for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Navdeep, for this wonderful session today and sharing tips on how to take a Six Sigma based approach towards pricing. Thank you also for sharing this amazing example where you took the audience through every step involved in the Six Sigma journey, starting from defining the project all the way through setting up controls and making sure that there is enough discipline created in the entire process. I particularly like one specific area which you stressed on a lot, which was with a well laid out discounting policy and approval authority, the need for exceptions are minimized. And I think that's very critical in B2B industry companies where exceptions are part of every single day. And if organizations can minimize exceptions, that's a great win for them. You also shared the benefits of taking the Six Sigma pricing approach. You mentioned returns are very quick, the investment required is fairly low, and there are some unintended benefits that come along with the process. And definitely, this makes the entire process data driven and replaces the emotional pricing processes that many companies apply in connections with their favorite clients, with their favorite lines of businesses, and so on. That's great. Few questions I would like to ask you. One is, see, Six Sigma is also about minimizing defects. Now, which essentially tells us that we can pinpoint where the defect is happening. Now, how would you pinpoint defect in pricing?
So one is, it's how you define the defect. So the definition is up to the company. So for in this case, it was variance in pricing. The price is too low or too high. So that could be a defect. That a company is now managing towards outliers, and then it wants to minimize outliers. So a different company could look at the timing it takes to reduce an exception process. So that could be, there was when I showed you the Pareto chart, it was about how long it takes. So in certain companies, speed to market is essential, because a competitor could beat you by just proposing a price faster than your company. So that could be another defect. So a company could just define what defects they're going after, but in either case, in any case, what they need to see is the when they set up the definition for the defect, it should be something that can be reasonably solved. So it can't be just, oh, let's improve our profitability by 6% and not really break down by what means.
Absolutely. So earlier in your session, you mentioned that pricing operations will often help you improve your pricing strategy. What was in your mind?
Oh, that was more that when there is a good analysis and there are insights about customers, competitors coming from that data, that helps us fine-tune the pricing strategy. The strategy is in place. A company has, let's say, decided we are going to have value-based pricing. Now, that is the overarching strategy at the company, but by that itself, it may not mean anything unless we put some teeth in it. So if there is clearer information about the customer needs or how they have behaved and how their sales trend has been, and which competitor was in play, now with all that information available to us and clearly looked at and displayed, the company can really fine-tune their strategy. That's what I meant.
Thank you. Now, with Six Sigma pricing, is having a baseline prior to taking up the pricing improvements essential? Uh, I'm coming from the point of view of new startups where they do not have any baseline to start with. Okay? They
Right.
roll out their pricing operations. They probably not even certain whether what they're doing is actually going to work with their clients or not. Now they're dealing with their initial few customers. Will Six Sigma pricing be relevant for them also, or is it only for the larger, well-established companies who already have a history of customer interactions available with them, and now they can leverage that prior learning and improve pricing?
Actually, that's a very good question. Makes me think also. Six Sigma is a toolkit. So it's no more than that, how well a company can apply it. So it really works in mature environments which already have copious data and they already have those established problems of variance. Now, a startup is actually putting a foothold in the marketplace, trying to figure its place. They may have no or very few competitions because they are innovative by nature. In their case, they're trying out things. They are putting promotions in the marketplace just to get their product known. In their case, they also need to have a game plan. It may not be a Six Sigma type game plan, but to start in a disciplined way, that when they try out pricing, they look at the effect of that pricing, and as they change their plans, they keep monitoring that and not just throw things in the marketplace and just wait for good things to happen. So the idea of Six Sigma here was not just that we only have 3.2 parts per million as our sort of almost no defect. The goal is also aspirational, that when we are talking about Six Sigma, we are talking about Six Sigma pricing, that we are talking about continuous improvement, and we are talking about discipline. So those two aspects, if a company could take out from this discussion, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. Continuous improvements and discipline, that's the key for successful pricing operations. Well, we have several questions posted by our audience on Twitter, and I'm going to take some of those. There's a question posted by Anmol, and he would like to know, how can Uber use Six Sigma pricing?
So in Uber's case, what they're doing is it's surge pricing, dynamic pricing, and if you see across the world, there are complaints that the prices are too high, and that may work in their favor today, but they are getting sued, and in many places, customers are not happy. So if it works within their strategy, if they want to have dynamic pricing, do they have what kind of variance is allowed? So if they have clear rules for themselves that we won't go beyond a certain point, because after a certain point, our customers get unhappy, they need to probably look into that. That would be my suggestion.
Absolutely. Another question is posted by Sheetal Mohite, and she would like to know how should we measure the impact of price changes. Now, one method you touched upon earlier, which was to continuously monitor the variances that are there in your pricing, as well as is your entire profitability moving up. Are there any other secondary measures or primary measures that companies should put in place when they are measuring the impacts of their price changes?
Sheetal, thank you for that question. This is one area where most companies, even established companies, are quite weak at. How do you measure price? And for an industrial environment that I showed, pricing was there are many different types of customers, many different regions, many different SKUs. So this one product line I talked about, they had 60,000 variations of that one SKU. So in that case, what companies do is look at pricing, compare pricing year over year, but not just leave it at that, but look at year over year for the same kind of customer in the same region. If you have that level of data, you go to that level of granularity to look at how pricing is changing at that level of granularity and then roll it up. So now you have the benefit of presenting high-level price changes to the senior management, whether there's improvement or is staying flat or less. But then you also know at a granular level where you need to make changes. If the pricing is in some place really low, is there need for intervention to go fix it? Or if the pricing is really high in some places, you really need to just, instead of giving a lower discount, even change the list price. So then you can make those kind of decisions.
Absolutely. So through your pricing operations, you basically implement your pricing strategy, and then so that will be a top-down approach where you have a well-defined pricing strategy and how does it translate to every single customer segment. But then you do a secondary analysis and see how at the very bottom of your decision notes, how is it impacting individual customers, and then roll up the information. I think that's a wonderful idea. There's another question posted by Mrunmai, and she would like to know how can Six Sigma be used in data analytics. And I think what she's trying to refer to here is, see, with data analytics, every organization is different. So if a company is offering data analytics services to multiple organizations where the value delivered through data analytics is very unique, very different for each of the clients, how should they go about pricing their data analytics services?
Oh, how do they go about? So it's a strategic question. How do they? So I'll think about it.
She's asking how can she apply Six Sigma for this purpose?
Okay. Okay. So if you have a given set of customers, you're looking at how do you price the customers. So again, I think it's more of the strategic part of it. But what analysis actually you do as part of that Six Sigma, there's a immense toolkit. So one is you can do your trend analysis, what you would do anyway, a trend analysis, but you can go deeper into things like hypothesis testing. So in one company I saw the salespeople, it was an air conditioning environment, and the salespeople said the pricing in Phoenix, which is a pretty hot temperatures, and pricing in, let's say, East Coast in Boston need to be the same for the same product, and which is not the case because when it became very hot in Phoenix in the peak season, the prices, the company had higher demand, so they could get higher prices. So one was that salespeople were asking for that price, that when we went and looked into the data, their own practices, so we did some hypothesis testing and found out their own practices showed that they were pricing quite rationally. Although they were asking for something, they knew about that, and they were pricing according to some rationale, which made sense. So we could show it to them that you're asking for this, but then you already price in the right way. So why would you be changing your practice? So that is one way of doing it. But looking at variance, looking at, so there are quite a few tools that Six Sigma, if you are good at statistics, that and use a statistical program that you can do. But even simple analysis like fishbone diagramming, etc., that could help you. Which are the areas which you need to improve and be able to price higher or lower to your customer? I hope I've answered your question.
So basically, go back to the drawing board, understand how your different customers are different, do a fishbone analysis, and really try to figure out if there is any way to group customers and classify customers into different groups and explore
Right.
if there is an opportunity to price them differently. Absolutely, that's a great suggestion. Now, Navdeep, you had touched upon this subject earlier, but this is a very important part for most organizations, especially when they are looking at their sales numbers, their profitability numbers, and they're wondering, okay, I know my pricing is not right and I want to get started. So how should these companies approach the journey of pricing excellence? I mean, what sorts of organizational structure do they need to put into place? And basically, what sorts of questions they need to put before the management and say that, okay, we need to find answers to these questions as part of our pricing. Can you share some more thoughts on this?
So typically, this is what happens in companies. There is some sort of a crisis that triggers, and some introspection then triggers, oh, we need to improve our pricing. And then typically a company would say, oh, our pricing strategy is out of whack. We need to, somebody comes and say, oh, we are doing cost plus pricing. We need to go into a different, a lot of companies would just say market-based pricing, but they need to go into value-based pricing. And those are, to do that quickly, are tall orders. What a company really needs to do is really sit down, get the stakeholders in a room, and think about what are the key pain points. So what I've done, what I do it sometimes when I do workshops with companies is to just have the stakeholders in the room and write down what are the problems they are seeing. And some people say, whether in the customer service, everybody has a perspective about pricing. Or customers are complaining, or somebody in finances or margins have been going down, or a product manager says, price may be too high and I'm not getting enough sales. When we write them all down, we want to develop, then I give people a pen and say, okay, put your top 3 problems. So go and mark of all these 40, 50 problems on the board that you see, mark your top 3, and it becomes very clear that after a small workshop, people gravitate towards 4 or 5 problems. And that becomes, those become the top problems for the company, regardless of what they are. And typically they start with, the company is looking to fix the transactional pricing. They're looking to get more measurement in place and more control in place. They have problems with their contracts because the compliance is poor. So a lot of the work that I see that the companies need to do first, they seem to be more to do with execution and the company's pricing operation. And of course, then there is need for bigger things. They need to improve systems, and they need to have a better strategy, a clearer strategy in place. But then that becomes sort of the beginning of a roadmap. Where does the company start? That if they start at the things they can fix quickly, and then go into things they need to fix, but it'll take more time, and they need the idea of that, Anshu, that you're mentioning a baseline, that what do we fix first, and then we are able to fix the next things.
Great. Well, as you rightly said, crisis will lead to more disruptions and innovations, and whenever those things happen, if those can be addressed through pricing, that's a great start for pricing journey in most organizations.
And as you said, Anshu, if a company actually can preempt a crisis and just have a discipline upfront, that company would be a very smart company.
So that would be like, a preventive pricing for preventing crisis. That's an amazing thought. I never thought about that. Well, thank you, Navdeep. It's been an amazing session today. Thank you for sharing these amazing tips on how organizations can apply Six Sigma processes in their pricing operations and benefit from the huge potential that pricing offers to businesses.
Great. Thank you so much, Anshu, and thanks for all of you for spending an hour of your time for this discussion.
Well,
it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. This knowledge series is being conducted by Sciative Solutions. Sciative helps companies compete and grow profitably through its suite of scientific pricing solutions and services. Please keep checking sciative.com for future sessions in the Sciative knowledge series. Our next session is on August 11th, which is a Thursday, and our speaker is Ruben Pandian, and he will be sharing his views on retail pricing, analytics, and optimization. So we hope to see you again in the next sessions, and thank you for joining today. Bye-bye.